Hi, this is Steve Rigolosi, and tonight on Forgotten Mysteries, I have for you Recipe for Homicide by Lawrence G. Blochman. This is copyright 1952 by Lippincott, back when they had a fiction mystery imprint that was called Mainline Mysteries. I think you can see the colophon here. So don't confuse Lawrence G. Blochman with Lawrence Bloch, author of the Burglar Who books, nor with Robert Bloch, who was the author of Psycho before Hitchcock ever made it into a film. So Robert Blochman has a pretty interesting biography. He was a longtime resident of San Diego, and like so many mystery novelists of this era, he had a career in journalism. He was posted all over the world, had an international career, and then began writing mystery stories and mystery novels. He was awarded an Edgar for Best Short Story, and then his novelistic output was about 12 books, so he was not super prolific. But I did some research, and I find that his books were pretty well liked, when they were published. He seemed to have a following. He seemed to have critics who liked his work and liked him. And I can see why, because I did enjoy the book, even though I think the title is a little, Recipe for Homicide, it's a little generic mystery thing. I don't love generic titles that don't really tell you much, although this one does, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But I do get a kick out of the cover image there, right, of sort of a woman sitting at her desk keeled over as a result of eating the recipe, but we'll get into that in a minute when we talk about the plot. So, hello. Okay, so usually I like to start by talking about where the book is set, and that proves to be a bit of a conundrum for this book because it isn't set in any state, United States state, that is ever named. We know that Chicago is the largest, nearest big city, but the town is named North Bank, and whether it is in Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, Wisconsin, I mean, nobody knows really where it is. So that left me feeling a little, at 6s and 7s, I wasn't really, I didn't feel well grounded geographically, but that didn't really matter because the story is good. So the cover, which I keep showing you, bills this as a Dr. Coffee mystery. Dr. Coffee was Blochman's series character. His full name, Daniel Webster Coffee, and he is a pathologist and a forensics expert. And so one of the things that makes this book really fun to read is to see how forensics were done in the 1950s, because Blochman clearly did his research into how these people do their work. And so some of the most interesting parts of the book are involve watching Coffee and his gang perform experiments using microscopes and different chemical tests and all these really cool things that give a lot of information that were not available to crime solvers in the days before chemistry and DNA and all that other stuff. And Dr. Coffee's a great character. He's really likable. He's very, very competent. He's calm. He's polite. He's cooperative. He's like the kind of old reliable guy you would go to when you just need someone who's no BS, who's pleasant to work with, and who's very good at what he does. And I always admire and like characters like that. However, it's not really a Dr. Coffee mystery because he only plays a secondary role. The main character is Gilmore, Robert Gilmore, who is basically a public relations specialist for a massive canned soup company, the Barzac Soup Company. And, he's a corporate guy. They work on a big soup producing campus where they have, vats, and they bring in tomatoes by the tens of thousands of pounds, and, they do the cooking on site. So it's this kind of big soup campus. And how it all gets started is the war is ongoing, and the soup company wants to do its part. So they create special rations for the U.S. military, that kind of meet the criteria for what military rations have to be. And, and Gilmore decides to, kind of turn this into a publicity opportunity to show how patriotic Barzac is. And so he stages a press event, and he gets down there, the company's chief, I guess you'd call her home economist, a very likable woman named Peggy Bayliss, who, has that traditional job of, like creating recipes that use Barzac soups to put on, the labels of their cans and in magazines and newspapers. And, do people still do that stuff? They must, but I've never known anyone who did it. And so Peggy comes down, and, they make a big brouhaha about her trying the rations, which kind of look like brown glop, but she's got to put a happy face on it. And they're not too bad tasting, but within a couple of hours, she is dead. And it's the cause of her death is very quickly traced to arsenic poisoning in the soup. So the question becomes, like, what's going on here, right? Why is somebody trying to sabotage and kill members of the U.S. military? Because there's so much arsenic in here. You're not going to eat any of these rations and live, right? Because the dose is, 30 times higher than a fatal dose, right? So you're not going to eat any of this stuff and survive. Police are brought in, a kind of a blue-collar, tough guy named Max Ritter. He's officially in charge of the investigation, but really much more of it falls to Gilmore, who has a company's reputation to protect, and Dr. Coffey, whom he knows from a previous case. So they're trying to figure out what's going on. And in the back of all of this is Cold War politics. There is somebody who works in the factory, like a line leader. I don't know exactly what the name of the position is, who is a card-carrying member of the Communist Party. And this is that era where they worried about all that kind of stuff. And the powers that be wonder if he has received orders from his communist superiors in Russia to, poison rations for the American military. And at the same time, this is where it gets a little complicated. Gilmore had earlier married a Middle Eastern belly dancer who it turned out was a spy and owned a copy of Rousseau's book Emile, in which was written in invisible ink the names of the Russian spies and so forth. So Gilmore gets his hands on a copy of this book, but he doesn't know what's in it. And the whereabouts of the book are sort of always bubbling in just below the surface throughout the book about where is this book and who wants it and what can be done with the information in it. But in the meantime, we have to solve the mystery of who killed Peggy Bayliss, who was a very much liked woman. I'm actually married to a good friend of Gilmore. They had been in the service together. So George Bayliss was married to Peggy. So that gives you the plot. Let me tell you about some of the many things that I liked about this book. The first is, there's no denying it. I think journalists are just trained to grab a reader's attention right from the very beginning, right? You've got to grab that reader with an opening line or an opening paragraph. And it applies to novels as well as to books. And I just find that, writers of this era and novelists who started out as journalists often have this gift or this skill. It's not to say that other novelists don't have it, but I find a lot of the more modern books that I read are a little slow to get started, whereas books of this era, you're kind of off and running from the first chapter. And I like that because I think suspense is a key element of a mystery novel. Another thing that I liked, and this is going to sound totally wackadoo, but I loved the soup background. So I grew up eating a lot of soup. I've always loved soup. The funny thing is, in this book, they're moving away from prepared soups to these newfangled condensed soups that people seem to want, right? So I grew up with Campbell's condensed soup and, had that for the first 20 years of my life. And then, I found Progresso and the other, these other fully constituted soups that were just eat out of the can, which are, so much better. Who would ever go back to condensed soup? But that was what they were doing here. This was the latest thing, condensing soup, and it was all the rage. And I love the details of how much this company cared about the soups they made. They had a chef, Lenormand or Lenormand. I'm not great with French. Who takes his job very seriously. He wants to make sure that people who buy Barzac soups are buying the most delicious soups at the best price, made from the finest ingredients, made with care, made by chefs, made by cooks who really care about the way something tastes and what it's created from, as opposed to just wanting to make a quick buck. And so you see the assembly lines, you see kind of some of the business practices of how the company has kind of a vertical organization where they plant special seedlings for the tomatoes they like that make the best soup, and then they sell those seedlings to farmers at a low price, and in return the farmers promise to deliver them the full crop of tomatoes so they can make their delicious tomato soup. And I loved the soup details. It was you wouldn't think soup would be exciting, but I enjoyed that as a soup lover. I like the writing style quite a bit. I think Blochman was a natural writer. He was snappy, good quality lines, good observations, good, I guess I'd call it a natural writer. I liked Dr. Coffey, and I liked his staff. He has a very competent, she's underused. He has an assistant, what is her name? I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget. Doris Hudson. And she is kind of his Gal Friday. And she's, like I said, she's underused, but she is a really good character. He also has in his employ an Indian doctor from India, Dr. Mukherjee, who is really top-notch at what he does. So he and Coffey are always putting their heads together and having forensic conversations. So it's fun to watch two experts bouncing ideas off each other and saying, oh, is this going to work, or should we try that, and so forth. What I would warn you about, though, is modern readers should know that Mukherjee is treated a little stereotypically, with kind of broken English, with an Indian accent, and some of the characters refer to him by what we would consider an ethnic slur now. They call him Swami. But Blochman himself has great respect for the character and makes him likable, somebody to aspire to being like. And I thought that the plot resolution made complete sense. And it was something that that had actually flickered through my head, but I didn't follow the trail. I didn't follow Ariadne's thread when it occurred to me because of the MacGuffin in this book. And there is a MacGuffin, and the MacGuffin is the copy of Rousseau's Emile. I don't want to tell you any more than that, but suffice it to say that Blochman does a good job of kind of misdirecting you or moving your attention towards something less important in order to hide what is really happening. Although, of course, our heroes figure it out by themselves through use of their little gray cells and working together. So all told, an enjoyable book with sprightly writing, a good mystery. I did think it was a little long. I thought that it maybe had some drag in the last third, maybe 20 or 30 pages could have been cut. And there was one other aspect of it that I was not crazy about, which is that Gilmore has this sort of on-again, off-again thing with a woman who works at the soup company. Her name is Barbara Wall. And they had worked together back in New York where he fired her. And then she comes to work at Barzac and ends up being his boss. And they're kind of romantically, they want to be romantically involved, and they are, but they're not. There's a lot of that kind of, quite frankly to me, like sort of annoying, what is this relationship? And Barbara is, I don't know, for a woman who is so professional in her job, she's kind of a player of head games. Gilmore never really knows where he stands. She's always sort of flirting with him, approach and then retreat, and like he's really interested in her, but I can't understand why, because that type of woman, or person would just drive me crazy. I hate that approach and retreat. Like, make up your mind. Do you want to be with someone or do you not? Choose and move forward with your life. But this playing around with some guy's emotions, not something I find appealing. And so Barbara ends up being really the main female character in here, and I just didn't like her very much. I don't know if Blochman was trying to position her as sort of a modern woman who doesn't necessarily think traditionally and maybe is caught between worlds, caught between, traditional roles and caught between, and maybe more modern roles, more of an independent woman kind of thing. But she just didn't appeal to me. And it's a bummer when you have a good cast, but you can't really like the main female protagonist. But other than that, I think it was an enjoyable book. I can recommend it. I haven't seen a lot of him. I found this one in a used bookstore. It's a book club edition. But check them out. See what you think. Certainly Dr. Coffee is a good and memorable character. So if I see any more books starring him, I think I will pick them up because, like I said, I like this one. I always like to close with something a little different or interesting. And this book was published, this edition of the book was published by the Dollar Mystery Club, which was one of the old-time book clubs that would take full-price books and publish them with lower production values, such as lower paper, a lower quality binding, and then sell them at a reduced price, so that instead of paying $2.50 for the book, you literally paid $1. And so I'm always for anything that makes books more accessible to more people, and certainly price, is a concern for 99% of us. But This particular series has on the back cover a brief essay by Howard Haycraft titled "The Pleasures of Reading Mystery Stories." And I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but I thought I might just read the first couple paragraphs because I think they will appeal to mystery readers out there. And then maybe in other videos I'll read some of the other paragraphs. So let me just get my eyes on and I will read to you. It begins. People read mystery stories for a variety of reasons. Some read to put themselves to sleep, others to keep awake. Some to solve the puzzles they present, others for the excitement of the chase. But nearly everybody reads mystery stories today for one prime quality. They are good entertainment. Perhaps the most striking illustration of the place the whodunit has come to occupy in modern life occurred in London during the Great Blitz of 1940. Nightly, at the entrances to the fetid underground shelters, portable raid libraries were set up to supply, by popular demand, mystery stories and nothing else. So it's nice to know that we as mystery lovers are part of a great tradition of people who love this genre and really can never get enough of it. There's just something about mystery. It can be endlessly inventive, and so many writers have done so many interesting things with the genre that, gets looked down on as, genre fiction or pulp fiction or whatever. But I suppose the same thing could be said for, other genres like horror, fantasy, and science fiction. I don't know much at all about science fiction and fantasy, but I certainly see a lot of books out there, and I know they have their adherents. And so really, good genre writing equals the best, literary writing that's out there. But I've made that argument before, and I don't want to repeat myself ad nauseam. So that's what I've got for you tonight. Again, I show you Recipe Homicide by Lawrence G. Blochman. And if you've read it or have any comments or thoughts, please feel free to share them below. I always enjoy hearing from watchers and listeners. And, if you disagree with me, feel free to tell me. I can certainly take it. Okay, thank you and have a good night.